Hey guys, how are you? Welcome to Real Talks. It's been a while since I think we three have done a Real Talk, so it's good to be here. Elliot, I think this is yours after quite a while, I think.
Yeah, I've missed you
Yeah,
guys.
we
Actually, no, I haven't really.
yeah, we were banning you for some time, but I think it's time to welcome you back. Um, but I thought we would talk about uh being confused on the journey and being able to stay in that confusion and accepting the confusion, because a lot of the time people really want to solve confusion very quickly, and they want like an answer and like a way out of that confusion, and that itself then makes them feel even more frustrated and afraid with what they're already suffering with. So, and Sam, you and I have to like talk about that quite often on our one-to-one calls as well. It's something we have to
Yeah,
reinforce for people quite a lot as well, because I
definitely.
think, and I think especially when people start to make quite a lot of steady progress in the beginning, it's it's very easy to fall into a trap of like wanting to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and just being like, okay, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. So when they hit that kind of hurdle where there's some confusion or something they can't wrap their head around, the anxiety and the frustration shoots up, because it's different to what they have experienced at the beginning of their journey, kind of thing.
Yeah. And you always got to remember that when you've got a dating disorder, obviously you're going to date everything and you're going to feel very lost at times and very confused, especially when you've got a disorder that's going to doubt itself, right? You're going to doubt you've even got OCD. You're going to doubt all the work you've ever done. You're going to doubt Albert Ellis. You're going to doubt us. You're going to doubt everything, right? There is no rules to OCD. Yeah. And I remember at times even just doubting like compulsions. Is this a compulsion? And that's all part of the confusion. Because how
Yeah,
many times have we all said, us three here, that am I doing it right? You know, something that I said all the time. Am I doing this right? How do I know that I'm doing it right? What's the point if I'm doing it wrong? I mean, I speak to many people on coaching calls that are reluctant to even start reading the books, putting in the recovery work just in case they do it wrong. So because they're
yeah,
scared of feeling confused, they're scared of feeling even more lost. And I always tell people that you've just got to treat it as any other emotion. You've got to just ride with the feeling of being confused and lost. Expect it to be part of the journey. You are going to feel very confused at times. If you're trying to go on this journey with no confusion, you're going to come to a shuddering halt, aren't you? Because you're like, oh, what do I do? Because you're going to doubt everything. And that can happen. I remember it being a year into my journey. And I remember I was reading some of the books on the reading list, and I read something that didn't quite make sense. And I couldn't quite make sense of it, and that was it. So that small little thing then sent me into a spiral because I hated the confused feeling. I wanted the journey just to be plain sailing. I could just read a few books and it'd be gone. Because I thought, well, hang on a minute. What if that's a bit contradictory? What if that's conflicting? And then I got
yeah,
very confused, felt very lost, and then I went into a cycle because of fear, never getting better, always being stuck, and so on. So it's knowing
yeah,
that confusion is part of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just jump in as well. I think with the whole confusion thing, right? Um, because having OCD, right, there is actually a crossover between people with OCD and people without OCD, right? And the lines are blurred between that. So I'll give an example. So say you've got people who don't have OCD and they're in a relationship. One partner might ask the other person, "Oh, how are you feeling?" Right? And then someone with OCD might also ask the same question, and it can get a bit confusing about what the line in the sand is, because
Yeah.
even if you've got OCD, you might still have a genuine reason to ask your partner how they're feeling, right? But when you do that, we get scared having OCD that it could be a compulsion, right? But yeah, because of the crossover with normal life with OCD and non-OCD, I think that's a big reason why there's a lot of confusion.
I find that very difficult with health, and I'm sure mom did with contamination as well, because how are you going to know whether something's a
yeah,
genuine concern? I mean, if I was trying to work out a genuine health concern, you're in trouble. And how often do you say, take the risk? Because you're never going to know for sure. Yes, it could be genuine.
yeah.
Yes, your fear could happen, right? It's all part of rolling with not knowing for sure. It's just rolling with uncertainty again, isn't it? Not quite knowing.
And people come in with like, actual health issues as well. They, um, uh, like someone I'm working with right now, just gave birth, right? And there are some complications post having a child as well. There are like thyroid problems as well that she's experiencing right now. So those are things that you obviously have to factor in as well, but then you also have to take into account where are things like going a bit too far in terms of either compulsiveness or checking and this and that, because there are going to be a ton of things. And like it, and from the outside, looking from the outside, you're really able to see where people are also going into a bit of an overdrive with things. And like Elliot, I think like the relationship example is like I think one of the most common ones as well, because at times when you're working with OCD sufferers, relationship OCD sufferers particularly, from the different things that they're telling you, you can tell that there are problems in the relationship, and you can tell that there are things that they need to address as well. And finding that balance is then really essential in trying to work on things, but also then giving OCD sufferers a reminder that the problem to even a real life situation, the relationship is not going to happen within a day. Problems in relationships sometimes even take sometimes months for people to really communicate and really talk about it and then overcome as well. So, and that can be for a regular person, obviously, that's a really frustrating period to be in, to not know where, where the relationship stands or where the two people on that particular issue, what page they're on. So for a relationship OCD sufferer, of course, the frustration for that really shoots up even more. So for them, it's a bigger challenge to sit through the confusion and the uncertainty and the discomfort compared to like the regular person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
I also felt very confused by feelings at times. I remember at times saying, I just feel confused. And then my partner
Yeah.
or Rob would say, well, why? And I'm just saying, well, I don't understand why I feel this way. And that was because I was putting in the work. So I was doing my disputing, I was doing everything that I had to do, but I was just still confused as to why I still felt guilty. I was like, why do I still feel guilty? And that became a vicious cycle because then I tried to force rid of the feelings, right? So just knowing that you're gonna feel confused, I think that's so crucial because it's just the reluctancy to feel confused. It's like, wait, I can't be confused. I need to know for sure this is working.
Yeah.
That becomes a vicious cycle, doesn't it? Because then you try and force recovery, which ain't gonna work.
Yeah. I feel like as you work on fear of fear and accepting, having anxiety and, potentially doing it wrong, so to speak, that you sort of get a bit more comfortable with that uncertainty. I remember for me, so with obviously HOCD was my main theme. And I think, with the themes that have exposure dominated, like an exposure dominated ring to them, so not really, sensory motor, but actually doing exposures like HOCD. I was just so consumed with like trying to look at everybody as I walk past in the street, and then because I was just so confused, it just gets really compulsive, and you're really frenetic. You're trying to like chase, and just to try and like desensitize to that. I know that can happen across like body dysmorphia, even POCD. So I think those exposure heavy ones, those themes that can really sort of dig its heels in, and yeah, as I disputed fear of fear, fear of being stuck forever, that just loosen the cogs a little bit, I would say.
For
Yeah.
me, that was true for contamination OCD exposures as well, because I think, and the reason I coasted for a good 2-3 years in wanting to do the exposures is exactly because I wanted to make sure in my mind, I was waiting for a time to be fully convinced that doing the exposures is not going to completely topple my life. And obviously, that's like compulsively waiting for the exact right moment and to have absolute certainty that nothing bad will happen. And I waited and waited, and of course that point never came. So, and my confusion then again in my head was, how can one do an exposure and then be okay with it, right? Because then you have given into the contamination, and then you have like technically spread the contamination everywhere in your life, because you haven't done any compulsions after that. You haven't done anything to contain it. So then how is it even possible to? And I just could not see myself feeling okay with that. I just could not see myself. But also, of course, later I learned as well, like the point wasn't to be able to see it before doing the exposure. I was only going to see it after I had done the exposure myself and experienced what it feels like to put myself through that and go through that situation. So um it's a very challenging thing. And it's a really tough spot to be in when you feel like there's absolutely no answer to what you want. Um and not even knowing what the next step might be.
Mohammed, with contamination OCD, can you cover how things are going to feel where, like, is that shall I genuinely clean my hands, that kind of thing, right? Because obviously, I know you covered this quite well in the webinar, because of course they have to use the bathroom, you're going to wash your hands, but somebody who's washing hands all throughout the day, how are you going to know whether it's right or wrong? You're not, are you? So you're right covering that, just confusion involved with contamination OCD there.
Yeah, I mean, oof, like it's a very tricky spot, like, so here's the funny thing, like, because I knew how much washing my hands was compulsive. So then what I started to do was, when I would go to the toilet to pee, right? I would basically do it in a way where I did not have to wash my hands after that. Because I felt like if I and I used like tissue and this and that. So because I thought if I would wash my hands after that, or if I would just open the tap, it'll spur that, cycle of, just standing there and doing that. And also because just the act of washing my hands just became so like tiring, and I had such a bad association with it that I wanted to then minimize all opportunities to do that. So I mean, it's funny because someone can even be washing their hands just once, but they might be doing it in a way like, so I'll give you an example. If I was just like rubbing soap on my hands, but then what I would do is I would make like a ring around my wrist and you can see my bones, right? So it was very easy to be like, okay, this is exactly where I'm doing this. So up till here, I'm soaping all my hands. So I can do it fully perfectly up till my wrists, right? And even though I was doing it just once, but it was still very compulsive in exactly how I was doing it. So um,
Very
the
crafty, very sneaky, that isn't it? Very sneaky.
right. So it's there's I think the comfort with confusion, in my experience at least, did not come with the like with washing my hands or just overall cleaning in the bathroom. It came with cutting my compulsions, and essentially, which meant doing my exposures outside of it, right? Because the bathroom was where I did all my compulsions in terms of washing and cleaning, sanitizing, this and that. Outside of it was the world where I could not contain the contamination. So that's where I had to really throw myself into the exposures of everything. And because when you do your exposures, you're contaminated head to toe, right? Because and there's a little trick with that as well, which I found very helpful was if I would touch something, the next thing I would do is then touch my face, my head, and just like pat myself with my hands down to my toes, because then I've essentially contaminated myself head to toe. And that really helped me with then, because when I went to the bathroom, then whether it was just to, wash my hands after eating food or whatever it was, it didn't matter at that point whether I even washed my hands or not, because I was already contaminated with whatever I thought was contaminating me. So it naturally completely broke the need for me to wash my hands in a compulsive way, even if it was washing it a single time.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I think fear of confused just becomes a big fear itself, doesn't it? Because you get so
Yep.
obsessed about being confused because it all boils down to the irrational belief that I cannot recover if I'm confused, right? So that sends people into a bit of a panic, a bit of a spiral. So what do they then try and do? Well, they try and get 100% certainty that they're making progress. right? So round and round they go because they're saying, I just cannot be confused. And then what they then do, they might then avoid putting in the work because they're scared of getting confused. They may try and, when you're sort of reading a book and you're trying to take in every word, right? Because they're like, I can't get confused here. So I've got to take in this sentence, I've got to take in this word, I can't misunderstand this, because it's the fear of fear yet again. But you've got to get so comfortable being confused, because if you can, then every time that confusion hits, you're going to go down that rabbit hole. Okay. So fear of being confused, fear of being stuck, all similar things, all tends to boil down to the main core fears, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, like, even if there was, like, imagine you had this blueprint, right? So you started the recovery journey, you read this blueprint, it's a step-by-step guide to how you're going to recover, and you follow it to a T, right? Imagine that was just written out in front of you, and 2 years down the line, you recovered. Even if there was that blueprint that you had in front of you, people still wouldn't follow it to a T. Why? Because we're inherently fallible as humans, and we're going to backslide, and we're always going to be doing different things at different times.
Elliot, a good example for that, I think a good example for that is when someone is given a diet plan when they start, I don't know, working out or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Nobody follows the diet plan to the T. Unless somebody does. I mean, then that's like a level of crazy. But I think like most people will sneak in something in and they will just so it won't happen that way, even with OCD as well. And also, even if you get like a 50-point bullet point pager on this is what you need to do, people will still be like, are you sure this covers everything? Is there something missing
Yeah.
over here? Is
There
there
comes a
something?
doubting disorder. Are you sure you missed this? Is that word written correctly? Are you
Yeah,
sure that's going to work?
exactly.
So,
So
Elliot, I've
I
got an
think,
interesting one for
yeah,
you here with
Yeah,
the fear of being confused, because obviously with HOCD.
yeah.
So, the fear of being confused with like sexuality, or just fear
Mm.
of being confused about identity. How does it link to that for you?
Um, I think it's both really. Obviously in HOCD you put like your sexual preference on a pedestal, right? You find that from an outsider looking in, it tends to be like a male dominated theme. So a lot of the time, it's males, maybe there's like a masculinity thing that, obviously males put a lot of emphasis on, their sexuality. So I think that's a big angle for it to come in. So it's definitely the sexual thing as well. Being a male, you want to be like enjoying your sex life.
Yeah.
Being a quote Jack the Lad, maybe. And then from an identity thing as well, it's just self acceptance. So it's saying, how could I possibly accept myself if this was true? And then there's obviously the big religious angle that can act as an anchor as well. In like Middle Eastern cultures, etc. So I think it's a bit of both, to be honest, Sam.
And it's isn't it funny how it's just the same chasing certainty again, no matter what it
Yeah,
is, no matter what you're confused by, you're then going to chase certainty, and then you're never going to
yeah,
get that. Okay, you could be confused about, like I say, whether you're doing it right, sexuality, identity, something in the past. Obviously, I felt very confused with relevant false memory. Did I do that? Did I not? Did I make that
yeah.
up? Has OCD twisted that? Has OCD manipulated that? I was never going to know. So I had to get used to not knowing and break down worst case scenario. So you're going to feel so confused. This is the bottom line of all of this. If you're trying to recover from OCD, you are going to feel so confused. Full stop. There's
Yeah.
nowhere around it.
so Elliot, like if I ask you, like from, let's say, when you were, I don't know, like 13, 14 years old, when we're entering puberty and we're discovering the world of like romance and sex, um since then, how did you particularly view dating or you know or or sex or anything like that? Like, how important was it to like the central narrative of your life?
Yeah, I think it was, to be honest. I think I had, when you're growing up, and you have like a group of mates, and you're all sort of, it's like you want to have that acceptance from your friends when you're going through puberty. You want to be liked. You're going through school. You want to be like the cool kid. I think there's a lot of pressure that comes from it from that angle. And I when you have that going up through puberty and stuff, and you really enjoy that, your hormones are raising, I suppose, and you get to do all those nice things. You speak to girls.
It's the most fun time, to be honest. I think
Yeah,
it's the most fun time to do that stuff because it's like pure bliss kind of thing.
yeah. Exactly. And you have that. And then when you go into HOCD, it's like this thing that you used to have has been snatched away from you. So when I went into HOCD, so I'm 27 now. So I was about 17. So I was all of a sudden living a completely different life, thought I was in denial, thought, I was just living a lie essentially. And I was massively comparing it to my life before then. And that was just a massive resistance area. And I had to adapt to the current situation that I found myself in to the best of my ability. And obviously that took a long while because,
Yeah.
HCD takes a while to break down, right? But yeah, to answer your question, Moment, it probably was quite a big area of my life. I know there's other things in life, family, work, but I think
Yeah, yeah. Of
especially
course.
especially for males, I think your sexual preference and your identity is a big thing, and it's going to be a big anchor point. If anything gets disrupted in that regard, it's gonna you're going to be upset, and it's going to turn the heat up. So I think that's why HOCD can really really get in there.
I mean, for you, like, because I think POCD also kind of like plays on, I think, sexuality as well, plus identity as well. Was it like a similar thing when it came to like when you were younger? Was it something similar with approaching
Yeah,
sex and
because
dating in a similar way, or was it
yeah,
just about wanting to be a good person?
well, yeah, that. But as you're growing up, you don't expect PhD to hit, so you don't. It just hits you by surprise. You're like, well, what's this all about? You don't even expect that to be a question. You're thinking, well, why am I getting these kind of thoughts? Why am I getting these intrusive
Yeah.
urges? So I felt very, very confused. But I also felt very confused, like I said earlier, about past like events, false memories that OCD was latching to. Because I was thinking, well, why is that even relevant? Because I knew logically that there's nothing I can do about these things in the past. So I was so confused by OCD. I was just so confused why it was latching to that. And I was so confused by why I was having these thoughts or these false attractions or whatever, or any kind of feeling that comes with it. Because, yeah, you're confused about everything with that. Any kind of sort of sexual taboo related theme, you're just baffled by it all. Because, yes, you're obviously scared, but you're just thinking, well, why can't I just live my life? I'm just looking at my friends going, why can't I just go out on a night out, get drunk, might meet someone on a night out and just not worry about things. Why have I got something in my head confusing this? Or are you sure you're straight? Are you sure this? Are you sure that? So I was confused by all of it until you start understanding how OCD is operating, right? Because that was the biggest game changer. It was like a weight off my shoulders. Once I realized what was going on, once I realized how intrusive thoughts worked, and then I started obviously getting better. But yeah, initially the confusion was everything at all. What I was going to do, if I was going to get through this, confused that I'd ever, get over this, all kinds of things. I also
Yeah.
want to touch on, if I can just change something now, I want to say a point about how your confidence will be on the floor when feeling confused. Okay, don't underestimate that. When I felt confused with OCD, it is even just making basic decisions, right? When I was making a basic decision, because my confidence was so low, am I doing that right? Am I doing it wrong? It's just simple decisions like, what am I going to do today? How do I start a conversation, right? Don't underestimate what it's going to do because you're going to be convinced you're doing everything wrong. Because when I had an inferiority complex, it doubted everything. Like every word that I said to somebody, if I was speaking to my boss, right, it had been hyper focused on every word that I said. Anyone I found important, I was hyper aware, hyper vigilant. Did you say this right? Did they think that of you? And then obviously my confidence on the floor, starting a conversation became a disaster because I avoided it. And even when I did try, I was stuttering, I was stammering, I couldn't get my words out. And that was because obviously I felt so confused about what I was going to say, confused about myself. Like, am I really this person? Am I really that? So it's going to get into everything. So there's no wonder your confidence is going to be on the floor. And this is why, as you start getting better, as you start recovering, your confidence starts increasing as well. But you've got to build that momentum for that to happen. You can't just suddenly be confident overnight. You build momentum, you start overcoming obstacles, and that confidence starts flooding back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think like for me, I took confusion and a lack of clarity as a bit of an ego hit because like
Yeah.
I think ever since I was a teenager I was always just like incredibly self-aware in many ways about myself, of like how I was feeling, why I was feeling a certain way. And I remember when I started doing early therapy in my early 20s, uh my my therapist also said to me, she was like, you're very self-aware and you pretty much know a lot of things that are already going on. And I would say like my therapy process was also like a bit of a catalyzed thing because of that, because I would come into the session already having, all the patterns laid out. Hey, so this is why I'm feeling this, and this is why it's happening. So, like it did half of the work for the therapist as well. But so I think like in a way it was like, oh, I'm good with understanding mental health. I'm good with understanding human behavior. So when it came to working on OCD, like, and then me feeling confused and feeling like for the life of me, no matter how much I tried to think about it and analyze it from all different angles, I could not understand why I was so stuck in fear. I took that so personally because I was like, I'm supposed to be good at this. Like, me
A
being
really interesting
confused
point.
is completely, yeah, it's completely like altering
It's accepting yourself
that
even when you're going to be
perspective
confused.
I've had.
Accepting your
Exactly, right?
confusion.
So, and I don't know. I don't think I was it came from an angle of being unintelligent or stupid, but I can definitely see how it can play on that a little bit, where it felt like, oh, I can only have this level of limited understanding, and beyond that, I don't have an understanding, and my brain does not have the capacity. And feeling like that was like some kind of like personal hit. So confusion really manifested in uh, the exposures way, as I spoke about earlier, but also in just overall um, understanding OCD itself as well, and what it meant for me as a person who understood mental health.
Yeah. It also it's going to go to the extremes as well. Like I'll give an example of what it did for me, right? When I had the fear of being confused, don't underestimate what it's going to do, right? I remember it got into, what if I get so confused that I just forget how to speak, right? That sounds ridiculous to us for on this call because we can just laugh at that. But when you're caught in that cycle, I like, what if I forget how to
Yeah.
read? What if I forget the English language? What if I'm in a conversation with someone and I just forget everything because I'm so confused? And then the fear of confusion came into it, right? So it came at fear itself. Okay.
Yeah.
So as you start breaking down
You
the
should
actual,
actually, by the way, do a video on that. You should do a separate video on fear of forgetting as
yeah, but
well.
I'll get so confused, my man. I'll forget what I'm gonna say, and then I'll just be sat there going, I forgot the English language.
It'll just be a video of 10 minutes of just Sam sitting like this, of like, what is going on?
That's what it's gonna do, especially with reading. Reading, especially.
Oh,
Like, what if I forget how to read? Sounds ridiculous,
yeah.
but that's how real it felt.
Sorry, so I'll just cut in as well. Sam, especially for me and you being native English speakers, we're very lucky to, have a grasp of that already with the Albert Ellis books as well, because,
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
some of the words in that book are
Oh
really,
yeah.
no, I've not heard of some of them, and I'm like a writer for my job, so I'm meant to know quite a lot. But, we're in that way, gratitude,
Yeah, I
for
often think that. Yeah. Imagine you can't even
yeah,
read. Imagine you got OCD and you can't even read, let alone
yeah.
speak English. Can't even read. That's a mountain to climb already. It's possible, of course it is. Of course, everybody can get better, but you got to think how lucky you are. The fact you can read,
It's a big barrier for sure. I think like I think about so many people. Like I went to like a private school where all the subjects were taught in English, right? So for me, like English was almost as good as a first language, right? Since the very beginning. And of course, I then did my O levels and A levels, but I do wonder that people who did not have that kind of educational background and who don't have a grasp on English that way, uh, I mean, for the life of me, I don't understand how they can work on OCD, because I mean, right now the only way I've known is to, for example, read the Ellis books and understand them. So some of the vocabulary, even for the things that are written in not just stylist books, but just like in mental health, some of the vocabulary doesn't even exist in my mother tongue. So I
Mm.
really feel for a lot of people who like don't have that understanding. So I mean, I don't know. I really don't know what they do. So it's a big thing. Like just even having the language itself to read the books, even if it may seem quite difficult.
Elliot, could you accept being confused for the rest of your life?
In what regard? What, OCD recovery, or just on anything in
Being
particular?
just being confused about how you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, it wouldn't be ideal. But like I've said before in other videos, you have to try and adapt to the circumstances that arise. You know, even if I was confused, even if I was just lost my mind, you know, I'd find a way to get through it, right? That's the mindset. You got to think, how can I adapt and, you know,
Wait,
decatastrophize.
so you haven't lost your mind yet? I mean, I thought you were already there. Um, I think like I think like with confusion, this is what has helped me in life. And even like after recovery, I thought this is how I live my life. Like I just got to Dubai like 2 days ago. I've just moved here 2 days ago. And for me, I'm like, okay, let me just live the next 6 months over here and see how it goes and see how I feel by the end of those 6 months and, evaluate then. Do I want to continue living here? Do I want to continue living in the same neighborhood? Uh, is there something I have to change about it? Like, give yourself like a little bit of a window of time as well whenever you're feeling confused, because you may not have all the answers by the end of that window, but you might know at least one more thing than you know right now. And that's a lot. Like, and that's a lot, and that helps you figure out, okay, then the next step for that. And that's the approach I take in life in general as well. I'm able to just be like, okay, let me see how things go for this amount of time, and then I'll figure out what the next thing might be.
And
And that helps with lifting the pressure off, because then I'm not thinking in the moment that I need all the answers right here, right now. Someone feed me the answers.
And a real perspective shift there is not only just doing that moment, but actually getting excited by that, right? The spontaneity, the randomness, the not knowing, right? Why do you need that control over what's going to happen? Of course, you want some idea of what's going to happen, of course, but the needing to know links back to this again: fear of being confused, not being able to cope, not being able to stand it. Okay, so you can actually turn on its head completely and actually like that way of living, right? You could just go, well, I don't know what I'm going to be in 6 months. And that actually excites you, right? So that's a big perspective shift there. And the reason I ask Elliot that question is because if you're stuck with fear of being confused, you have to go to worst case scenario. And if you remain confused the rest of your life, obviously breaking that down where your thinking's going wrong, you're catastrophizing. But like I just said then, change your perspective on being confused. Change your perspective altogether on uncertainty, on not knowing, the randomness of life. Okay? That actually excites me, right? That spurs me on, not knowing where I'm going to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years. If my life was planned out, I think that'd be very dull. I think that'd be a very dull life. Imagine you knew what you were going to do, what job you're going to have, who you're
Want
going
that?
to marry,
Yeah,
when you're going to
I
die.
don't want that
My
life.
life would be very dull, exactly. So you can turn the confusion and the uncertainty to a
I
positive.
would I, I would rather be confused and despair and and panic rather than have a predictable life. No, I mean, like, I think
Yeah,
for me, uh for me, like, one of the things that is one of my pet peeves in life is monotony. And when things get monotonous, that really just like kind of like gets under my skin and frustrates me. So I enjoy spontaneity. I like things, changing up and everything. Uh, I I I wouldn't be able to, like, for example, with Nick, I feel like he knows exactly what the rest of his next week looks like. I'm just like, I can't live that life. That's too much for me.
Yeah. I think a good thing to remember as well is, you know, being human beings and being, you know, fallible. There's always going to be that element of confusion that's going to reside within us, you know. Like there's never going to be 100% all the time where we're not confused about something.
we'd have to
So
be a
I think,
robot, wouldn't we?
yeah, exactly. So just accepting that as being part of human, I think, is also quite an important thing. And like when you are confused, say you're really confused about something, say you're confused, you might be doing like a paper or I don't know, a bit of research. And when you find that answer in the end, when you find what you're looking for, it's part of the challenge. And
Yeah,
when you achieve that, right, that is where the growth happens as well, right? You figure it out for
Yes.
yourself, and then you know it pushes you on to the next level. And I think that's a good way to look at it as well.
And
definitely.
and to your point as well, like, the things that I was confused about when I was 25, now I don't have any confusion about them at 30. But I have
Now
new
you're just more
confusions at
confused,
30
Mom.
now. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I sometimes feel like now I'm a bit more confused about more things in life, but now I have new things to kind of like figure out and tackle that I didn't at 25. So, which is fine. I mean, like I think if there were things I was still confused about, that I was confused about at 25, I'd be like, I'm going wrong somewhere. Like something's off over here. But yeah, there's always going to be something next to figure out.
Exactly. It's totally unrealistic to aim for just that 100% certainty on how your life's going. Like, am I doing it right? Have I got it sorted? You could, like Elliot said, that's such a good point. Like, you can get so absorbed and fascinated by the challenge of overcoming the confusion. Like you say, you're studying a research, you're studying a topic, you're learning a language, whatever it may be. You're fascinated by that confusion, so you overcome that. So that can actually spur you on, right? If you just stop at the first sort of confusion, you're going to not really get far in life, are you? Because everything's going to feel quite daunting. Everything's going to feel quite confusing, right? First call, okay, these are 6 books you've got to read as bare minimum. Oh, and then I might get confused and won't do it. You're not going to recover. Simple as that, right? If I learn a language, I can't just go, yeah, but I might get confused. I might get my words wrong. Well, I'm not going to learn a language then. So you're going to have to go through that confusion barrier to get anywhere.
Yeah, right. Well, guys, so
We
much for
covered
talking
all of it,
about
I'd say.
confusion. We have a lot of answers for a lot of confusing things now, I think. So I might go meet Rob now, by the way. So that might just happen. But I think we should do this again soon. Sam, you and I have to also schedule one with Nick as well. So we'll be doing more of these because we had a bit of a gap with real talks. But yeah, thanks for being here and good discussion.
Thanks
See you
all.
guys
See you later,
soon.
guys. Bye bye.
All
Bye.
right, bye.